Hello there, my name is Rabbi Yonatan Udren, and I have the great pleasure this morning of sitting with Rabbi Ari Ze'ev Schwartz, who recently wrote a tremendous translation and some of his own words as well on the teachings of Rav Kook, called The Spiritual Revolution of Rav Kook. And I wanted to ask you some questions, Rav Ari, about yourself, about Rav Kook. And let's just start off with you a little bit. And when was the first time that you remember encountering a piece of Rav Kook? Where you opened it up or someone taught it to you?
Well, I guess my first memory is when I was really young, not really, but 14, 15, I had a friend in Australia, I'm from Australia, who I remember him studying the poetry of Rav Kook. And so I just heard in the background of my life this name Rav Kook and being this very spiritual person. But the main feeling that eventually I would get is he's a Zionist rabbi, and really that's all to him. He loved the land of Israel, and it became this very strong Zionist narrative. But when I got to yeshiva, when I was about 19 or 20, and I started going to Haredi yeshiva, there was no mention of Rav Kook at all. So I had assumed, I guess he's not that relevant. But in the Haredi world, we were talking a lot of spiritual ideas. So I had this feeling, I guess if I learn Rav Kook, it would just be politics and Zionism. So I wasn't so excited to learn him myself. But one day, I had this friend who said, would you like to learn Rav Kook with me? And so I went up to the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of the yeshiva, this Haredi yeshiva, and said to him, can we learn, Rav Kook? Maybe you could introduce a book. And he said, Asur. Like a very strong, it's forbidden.
Where did you get that idea from that you wanted to see Rav Kook again?
Well, this friend started introducing, I remember he had Or to Torah. He had this amazing book that Rav Kook wrote about learning Torah. So I thought, let me ask the Rosh Yeshiva what he thinks of it, because, we weren't learning it in the yeshiva. So what eventually would happen is this Haredi, head of the yeshiva would forbid it from me, and it made me feel very kind of like curious about what Rav Kook was writing about that made it so forbidden. But still, I hadn't really touched it. And then when I met Rav David Aaron, an Israelite and Oraita, this amazing rabbi, both you and I love him and as students of his. So he really started introducing me to Rav Kook's writings, and he introduced me to the more philosophical and Kabbalistic parts of Rav Kook. And that's when my eyes really opened. Wow, this is a rabbi who is talking about more than just one issue, which I thought was an important issue, but just Zionism is only one issue. And Rav David Aaron would teach passages of Rav Kook from, about the purpose of life, about tshuva, self-growth, understanding oneself. And that's really when I started being amazed by how relevant Rav Kook's teachings are for my own life.
Was there one specific teaching that you learned with Rabbi Aaron that really kind of opened you up in the way that you're speaking about, that you said, wow, I never thought about this way before, or I never heard this described in this way before?
Is there a one teaching? There was this one amazing piece where Rav Kook talks about, I put it in the book, where he talks about a person who's trying to find God in the world, trying to find God and connect to God, but he imagined that God is only, I guess, in studying Torah and doing mitzvot. So when he walks outside, he feels suffocated because there's no connection to God outside in the world. And Rav Kook says, this is a misconception. So that's when I remember that piece like opening my heart and my mind to, wow, this is a rabbi who really gets how I'm feeling. I really do feel like I am torn. I have to be super spiritual when I'm studying Torah and praying, but when I'm out in the world, I feel kind of alienated from everything. So that piece really kind of shook me up, like, wow, I'm doing spirituality and religion in a very kind of fractured way. And that was a very holistic way of thinking. And as I would learn more and more, Rav Kook really thinks that is the highest learning of Torah, holistic thinking, how all the details fit into this greater whole.
So the title of the book, The Spiritual Revolution of Rav Kook, it sounds like in a way that that his writings, you would say that it's not only a spiritual revolution for Am Yisrael, but it sounds like there's a personal spiritual revolution that his teachings brought you to as well. Would you say that's true?
It's definitely true. If you would have met me, you met me post learning Rav Kook, or really at the same time. We met each other during that time period. But previous to that, and I was really obsessed with Rabbi Nachman before that, I really was, super spiritual always, obsessed with prayer and meditation. He'd bother to do it and studying Torah till 2 in the morning. I really would go all the way in the East Haredi yeshiva. But again, I felt this fractured, this feeling of like, I don't know how to channel this love of God in all the parts of my life. So yeah, it really, I would say writing the book changed my life, but obviously it began with studying Rav Kook. So it was a revolution, and I would say the main revolution was in relationship to myself, into understanding who I am as a Jew, as a person who really cares about meaning. And my relationship to my family started getting better, to my brothers, to my parents for sure. I mean, I remember my parents mentioning like, wow, you like having this feeling like, wow, something's happening to you, you're changing. And back then I couldn't just say it was because of Rav Kook, because there was obviously many things. Now that I look back at it, yeah, it really was those writings that really moved me to this new way of thinking about human beings, myself. Eventually would lead to changing my diet, becoming a vegetarian, all of that. But it was gradual. It wasn't all at one moment, but I would say there was a revolution happening inside.
And so, based on your own personal revolution, did that give you the inspiration to start to not only for yourself dive into his writings, but to translate and teach these writings because you felt like, wow, this really transformed me, this opened me up to things that I had never experienced before that were so lacking? Maybe this is something that can help other people. Was that the idea?
I mean, I guess a good way to think about it is if you find a medicine that heals a sickness that you have, so you say, wow, I want to give this medicine to other people. So yeah, that's a really good way of thinking about it. I guess because it was helping me so much, I had this almost like I felt responsibility, achrayut. Like any person that I'm teaching, I have to show them this spiritual medicine that I found. And what was amazing is the more I would learn Rav Kook, the more I'd realize, whoa, it's better than I thought. Meaning at the beginning I thought it was spectacular, but I didn't realize how good it was. And I can tell you right now, like, this is 8-9 years after starting translating and reteaching his words. There's more writings that keep coming out every year that that his diary entries haven't been published, and it continues to surprise me how relevant his words are, and it continues to affect me.
Does your Rosh Hashiva who said Asur to you know that you just published this book? Are you in contact with him anymore?
No. I don't think he would be. I don't know. I guess I just, our relationship kind of fizzled out when I left the yeshiva. He was kind of upset that I even left the yeshiva. He felt like a little bit betrayed. So I don't think I'd want to rub it in that I read a whole book. But I do think he'd be proud of me that I'm so passionate about Torah and mitzvot, and bringing all Jews and I think non-Jews as well to this appreciation of how deep the Torah is. So in that way, I don't think it contradicts what I learned back then.
If he would be open to sitting down with you and learning a piece of Rav Kook with you, what piece would you want to sit down and share with him?
Maybe that first piece that I learned about experiencing God in everything, not just in studying Torah and doing mitzvot. But again, I think it takes time for a person to shift their mindset. It didn't happen to me overnight. It really took time. And I can even think, like, not just, I said before, my diet started changing. I started thinking about how animals should be treated. And, Rav Kook has this important lesson that if you care for God, it should affect the way you perceive, not just Jews, not just all human beings, but even animals. So it started affecting my diet. But I think the main thing I'd like to show him, is that spirituality is so all-encompassing. But I wouldn't want to do it in a preachy way, especially not to a teacher of mine.
So you're involved beyond your writing and your own scholarship and translation. You told me before you see yourself as a teacher, and you put a lot of your energy into your lessons as a teacher and to teaching at many different institutions around Jerusalem, mostly to post-high school programs here in Jerusalem. So based on a modern Orthodox kid who grew up either in North America or maybe Australia or South Africa, and you're teaching to that group, what is it that you're trying to bring to them that's unique about the teachings of Rav Kook? And also, do you see in your exposure to these young people something of yourself maybe that you'd like to wish someone had been able to share with you when you were that age?
Such a good question. I mean, yeah, I really do see myself in the footsteps of these students of mine. Like, what would I have felt like when I was 18 or 19 or 20, finding a book like this, finding teachings like this? And I think it would have been a real, just shock to my system that the Torah and mitzvot is not just Torah and mitzvot. I mean, that really is one of the, I think, the biggest revolutions in the book that I've tried to portray is on just every topic. Rav Kook gives it a spiritual, emotional, intellectual kind of quality of depth. And like, let's take one chapter which is very close to my heart. I'm a musician. I trained musician. I toured the world when I was 15 or 16 in an orchestra. Went to music school when I was 18. Like, music is, in my soul. So for years when I was in yeshiva, I really felt like it was disconnected from Torah and spirituality. It had nothing to do with it. And then when I started reading Rav Kook's writings, and he takes art and music so seriously, and he even goes on to say, he thinks the Mashiach is going to be a very creative person who can convey deep ideas in creative, artistic ways. It really gave me this very sense of self-respect for what I'd learned growing up about art and music, and now I could combine that world. So I think maybe that idea that maybe pop culture, which I know is so important to the youth today, like entertainment, movies, music, that is a very integral part for Rav Kook of spirituality. And when a person, I know you're a writer, you studied creative writing, when you're creative in any form of your life, if it's music, art, writing, dance, that is part of your spiritual growth. And I think that's just an amazing paradigm shift for what it means to be a Jew and a spiritual seeker, that creativity is part of spirituality. So I think that's like a big message that I like to give over to my students. That
it sounds very similar to what you were sharing before about the original piece that you were talking about, that God doesn't only exist in the Beit Midrash, right? God exists in the outside world, but God also exists in creativity and music.
Yeah.
So it seems like that holistic approach was something that really was what woke you up, and you're trying to use those teachings to wake up other young people to the holistic approach of spirituality in all facets of one's life.
Another really attractive part of Rav Kook's writings, Rav Yonatan, is his kind of indifference, apathy towards labels. I think this is so relevant today. He's just not interested in calling himself religious. He has this piece I put in the book where he says the labels religious and secular are, idol worship names. Like, they crystallize somebody and they put them in this image of themselves that they can't get out of. And Rav Kook wants to free us from the need to say, I'm in this group, you're in that group, I'm right-wing, you're left-wing, I'm liberal, you're conservative, I'm religious, you're secular. And so I think that idea, again, I'm always trying to show my students to be somebody who's passionate about religion and Torah does not mean closed-mindedness, does not mean fundamentalism. It's more inclusive. And I think one of the phrases I wrote in the book is, I think Rav Kook has developed a language of inclusive spirituality, that he finds a way to talk about every topic about life in an inclusive way, that you can be passionate about the Torah but still be open and inclusive to truth in other religions. You can be passionate about following the Torah mitzvah and still be inclusive and open to people who are not following Torah mitzvah. And it's a very rare thing when you find somebody who can say, I'm passionate about something but I'm still open to people who are different to me. I think Rav Kook is a very good listener. I think he developed this great ability to listen to other people's arguments and internalize them and not have to just refute them.
So in bringing that up, maybe we can switch gears a little bit to talk about Rav Kook's teachings in our day. I'm hearing the importance and relevance for those teachings in our day. About 100 years later now, after Rav Kook has passed away, how would you see Rav Kook walking in today's world? I mean, we have very interesting, just this past Tisha B'Av, this past Sunday, you had in Yerushalayim, a lot of Jews in the country, but specifically in Yerushalayim, mourning the loss of the temple. And juxtaposed to that, on Sunday in Tel Aviv, there was this huge rally in the lesbian, bisexual, and homosexual community about same-sex couples being able to have legally have a surrogacy adoption program, and the government's stopping of that. And that's just one issue, not to speak about that specifically, but that's just one of the kind of the issues that we are dealing with today. The political situation with the state as it is today. How would Rav Kook walk in the world based on your understandings of his teachings today?
I mean, it's a very dangerous question because I'm not Rav Kook, and I wouldn't want to say his specific policies on any issue. But in broad strokes, I think based on his principles of the teachings I've been studying for so many years now, I think just like in his time you had atheists and secular Zionists who, in their own words, they hated the Torah and they thought it was disgusting, and Rav Kook still found a way to find good qualities in them and actually made friends with them. Nachman Bialik, Shai Gnon, Chaim Brenner. There are more where there were these secular Zionists, and Rav Kook went out of his way to open his heart to them. So I think you could apply that today, that people today that we see them say things that seem to be contradictory to the values of the Torah, Rav Kook, I guess he would say, that is no different to the secular Zionists in his time, that is no different to the atheists in his time. We have to find a way. It comes down to creativity. How can I, as a human being who is interested in God in all of the world, the whole darachayot da'eo, in all of your ways you have to know God. You can quote from Mishlei that Rav Kook always cites. So I don't think there would be anything off topic. I think you could say, well, Rav Kook will only go this far and he won't go that far. How he would do it, I'm not sure, but I think the desire and the motivation to go out of your way as a person who's interested in God to embrace and be inclusive of all those different fields that you talked about, I think that would for sure be something Rav Kook would want. And I think it would be surprising for us today to see Rav Kook do that, because we think, oh, Rav Kook, he was only revolutionary in his time period, and it kind of takes away from the greatness of a man if you say he's only revolutionary in his time period, because it's a principle he's teaching you. I know Rav Shagar, who's another rabbi I adore and who transformed my life, he saw himself as a Talmid of Rav Kook, and Rav Shagar would always say that the disciples of Rav Kook often take Rav Kook too literal. They only say, well, the things he was open-minded about in his time we can be open-minded about, but not in our time. And Rav Shagar would always say, well, that doesn't make any sense. He was giving you a principle of being open and inclusive, and you have to take what Rav Kook did in his time and try to apply it to your time. So to just say, well, we'll be open to secular Zionism, which a lot of religious Zionists are, but we won't be open to these other new liberal phenomena, I think that is kind of making Rav Kook into an idol, rather than taking him as a real role model.
Very interesting. So we can see, I guess what I hear you saying is that the application of his principles of openness, of finding a space in his heart to really listen and hear these other sides, so there would be an engagement at least with these issues.
For sure.
And I appreciate the point that we won't be able to know exactly what his position would be on these issues, but to understand that there would be an engagement with these issues. And I'm thinking of the kind of the predecessors of Rav Kook that also took that type of approach. Someone that I know is very dear to Rav Kook, the Maharal, as far as his engagement with the secular world around him, the Rambam, as far as his engagement, the Baal Shem Tov, and that around him. Would be amazing to be able to hear somehow Rav Kook to be able to deal with these issues. Let's just go back to you for a moment. You shared that kind of beautiful, intimate moment where at age 14 you had a friend of yours that shared that piece with you. Knowing what you know about Rav Kook now and the research that you've done and the learning and teaching that you've done and now putting out this book, if you could go back to yourself at age 14 and share a piece of Rav Kook with yourself, would it be that same piece of Rav Kook, or would there be another piece that you would want to share with yourself?
Well, me at 14 or 15, I am obsessed with guitar, playing music at every second I can, recording music, listening to music, also very passionate about sport. So I think 2 chapters in my book I think would be relevant to me at 14 or 15, there's a chapter which I brought many pieces of Rav Kook on physical exercise and the importance of the body. So I think that would be very relevant to me, that spirituality is about not just prayer, but also your body and your exercise. And for someone, I mean, till this day, I'm passionate about sport. I grew up in Australia, so rugby is like a religion there. So I grew this very strong appreciation of mastering your technique as a sports player. So I think that that quality would resonate. And then the second, that chapter I mentioned before about creativity and art and music. Rav Kook has this amazing statement he says about Rembrandt. My mother's an artist, and though my mother doesn't like Rembrandt, she likes different artists, Picasso and Monet, but Rav Kook very much appreciated Rembrandt. And one time he was in London. He got stuck in Europe for 5 years due to World War I breaking out, and so he would visit the National Gallery in London, and he said when he would look at Rembrandt, he would see like the light that God stored for the tzaddikim. So in other words, Rembrandt had this amazing ability to show the essence of things, the light of things, and he said Rembrandt was a tzaddik. Now, to say a tzaddik about Rembrandt is a very strong statement, especially if you've seen Rembrandt's artworks. There's nudity in it. In other words, this is not PG art. This is like what I would say today, pop culture. Like it really is unapologetically creative. And Rav Kook, again, is trying to find good qualities in all types of art, all types of art and music. So I think that would really, really resonate with me. A rabbi who is saying, you who are passionate about music, you have to realize that is a connection to God, and your desire to create music and be artistic. Where does that come from? Where does creativity come from? It doesn't just come out of your mind. It comes from something very mysterious. And I think that would have excited me back then to realize, wow, my own religion, Judaism, has something to say about where all of this creativity is coming from.
If you had the opportunity to sit down with Rav Kook in his study, to ask him a question, share a thought with him, bounce some ideas off him, what would you want to do? Let's say you had 20 minutes with Rav Kook in his office. What would you want to do during that 20 minutes? Is there one question or one idea you'd like to discuss with him?
You know how many years I've been thinking about this question? The truth is, students will often ask me out of a class, don't you wish you met him? So I have always two thoughts in my head. One is, yes, obviously, that would be great. And then the second is no, definitely not. The reason is because people often say don't meet your heroes because they'll disappoint you. I think that maybe meeting Rav Kook might have made it hard for me to teach him and to write about him in such a creative way, because I would have felt like I know him too well and I know exactly how he would say it. So maybe the distance actually enables me to teach him better. I've heard from students of Rav Shigar say the same thing, that students of Rav Shigar find it hard to be creative and to teach his ideas because they knew him exactly, so they can't just read the text and be creative with it. But people who'd never met Rav Shigar, so they can take the text really seriously and be very creative and find themselves in it. So I find maybe it's a blessing in some sense that I never met Rav Kook, because when I read his words, they are like a personal letter from God to me. It's not just Rav Kook. It's a spiritual text. So that's one answer. I feel like there is some sense of a blessing that as you get further away from a writer, a thinker, that you can actually interpret their words in a more relevant way. So I feel that's a blessing. But on the other hand, if I would meet him, I think maybe I'd want to ask him, I guess this is something I deal with as well, which is, where did you find the courage to say ideas that you really believe were what God wanted you to say, even if people disagree with you? Because he got so many opposition in his life for being open to secular Zionists, to atheists, to art, and he continued to find this amazing courage to write these ideas down, to teach it. And I know as a teacher, this as well, when you really want to say something to a student, but you're thinking, what will they think about me if I say it? And Rav Kook, it seems like he really just had this, azut de kedusha, to quote Rabbi Nachman, this holy courage to just say things that he really thought that's what God wanted to say. There's this famous story where his son, Rav Tzvi Yehuda, is editing his writings. He's going to publish it in a book called Orot, and he gets this piece. His son gets this piece, about the importance of physical exercise and Rav Kook wrote in this piece, that physical exercise to help the Jewish people when they're building the land. It could be the army, it could be actual physical exercise, is just as holy, just as important as people who are involved in mystical, spiritual endeavors in, studying Torah. And his son said, I think this is too far. I think you're going to get in trouble for this, Abba, and we shouldn't publish this. We should cut this piece out. And Rav Kook said, you have yirat basav adam and not yirat Hashem. You have fear of people, but you don't have fear of God. So that's kind of Rav Kook's way of saying to his son, no, if it's a true idea, I need to write it down and I need to give it to people. And even if there's going to be consequences. And by the way, his son was right. When that piece was published in that book, the Haredim hated him for it. They burnt orot in the book, in the streets of Mesharim. But yet again, Rav Kook, it seemed like he knew it was going to happen. And yet, that amazing courage. So I guess I'd want to know, where does that come from? How do you get it? I'd love to get some of that inside of me. Which I think would take more than 20 minutes.
And do you speak about that aspect of Rav Kook to your students? The fact that he was courageous, the fact that he was not afraid to speak his mind, that he was controversial, not for controversy's sake, but for the sake of truth?
I do talk about that a lot. I think one of the main things, paradigms I try and help students kind of shift misconceptions is, especially people who are in the religious Zionist world, they have this feeling that was always accepted as an important rabbi and always, in our language, a gadol ador. And I try and show them in his time period he wasn't. In his time period he really was, challenging the norms of his time, and it would have been, you would have been a radical to be involved in Rav Kook's teachings. And there's a story of Rav Ari Levin, a student of Rav Kook, famous student, where he's walking down the street to go to Rav Kook's house, and he has all these, kanaim, these zealots, religious zealots, walking behind him and screaming at him and saying disgusting things. And why are you involved with Kook? Why are you involved with this terrible Zionist rabbi? And Rav Ari Levin was quiet the whole time. Eventually they leave, and this one religious zealot comes up to him and says, I totally disagree that you're involved with this rabbi. It's dangerous what he's saying, but I respect you immensely that you didn't shout at us back. You didn't, say disgusting things. You have such good midot. And so Rav Ari Levin turns to this man and says, well, the person you hate, that's who I learned that from.
Wow.
In other words, how controversial it must have been to be involved with Rav Kook. And I try and help my students realize, when we learn Rav Kook's writings, we should feel that there's this revolutionary figure inside of the writings, and he, even though today he's more accepted as this, this figure of Zionism and in Orthodoxy, but even in the secular world, he really was revolutionary, and we have to continue that courageous path of his, trying to find good qualities in people you wouldn't imagine us finding good qualities in. And I think that's exciting for people to think of Rav Kook like that, to think of him not as a conformist, and to actually follow Rav Kook and to say, wow, I am being, avant-garde to follow Rav Kook and not cliche.
So since it seems like the spiritual revolution of Rav Kook has already been revolutionized and normalized, and you had mentioned that according to Rav Shagar, the idea is to extrapolate those principles and apply them today. Where is Rav Ari Schwartz's spiritual revolution today? Where have these teachings brought you, as far as your sense that where the changes need to be made in today's generation?
Well, I think you and I have discussed this a few times, but I've been running this spiritual center in Nachlaot with a past student of mine for about 2 years now, and one of the main goals of running this center was, could we find a place where religious and secular, right-wing and left-wing, liberal and conservative can meet together and talk about deep ideas and not get stuck on the names that we call each other. So I think, there's a phrase that I didn't make up. Rav Shagar uses it a little bit, post-religious and post-secular. And I think what it means to me is I'm not interested in the words religious or secular anymore. I'm interested in connecting to my soul, to Torah, to God. And I'm not interested in what label people give me. I'm interested in what those texts can do to me to awaken this deep connection to God. So I think that's really, for me, walking in the footsteps of Rav Kook today, to try and get beyond labels. And I think that's very hard for people to let go. On the other hand, I feel like our generation very much wants that. They want to be studying ancient religious texts and not to feel like that makes them old-fashioned. How do you do that? How do you give them these beautiful texts and not, oh, I guess I'm Orthodox, or I guess I'm... When we start talking about religion in a different way that isn't about the word religion and more about the search, that's why I called it the spiritual revolution of Rav Kook and not the religious revolution of Rav Kook, because I felt like religion, definitely Rav Kook doesn't like the word dati, but I think it puts him in a box, and he doesn't want to be put in a box. And if you look at his face, and he has this very black and white, he has like a strimal, long beard, so you put him in a box. But then when you read his words, he's out of the box, because he's not talking about those things that you expected him to speak. So I think he makes you colorblind. You're not looking at colors anymore. I mean, you're not saying, well, they're either black, they're white, or Rav Kook is beyond that. So I think that is, for me, like a very strong mission of mine, to kind of get beyond the need to box people in. I mean, I teach at a Sephardi Midrash in the Old City, and I teach in Ashkenazi, and I'm seeing more and more people just want to connect to their souls. It's not about what labels you give them, and I think maybe that is something that Rav Kook's teaching is so relevant for people today.
Beautiful, Rav Ari, thank you so much. I wish you tremendous success with the book and in your own spiritual revolution. Yeshar koach.